Lecture on Trasna na Tíre. I am delighted to welcome Commandant Larry Scallan, who is Company Commander in the 3rd Infantry Battalion and is stationed in James Stephens Barracks. Larry has over 32 years of service and has completed 8 tours of duty overseas and has given many talks and tours relating to Kilkenny's military history and heritage. He is also a graduate of the History Department in Maynooth. Maynooth. Larry has been very supportive of the Kilkenny, Callan and Ballingarry World War I memorials unveiled between 2016 and 2018. If anyone has any questions at the end of the presentation, if you want to just put them into the comments box and we'll put them to Larry after the lecture. So without further delay, I hand over to Commandant Larry Scallan for tonight's lecture from Bugle Call to Tolling Bell, Kilkenny's Great War, and enjoy.
Thanks very much, Marianne. Okay, I suppose just before, at the very start, I'd like to just surmise the title. The bugle call is the sound that a soldier hears, or is a sound that calls him to action or gets him up out of bed or tells him when to go to bed historically. And the tolling bell is the symbol of us all saying goodbye to our loved ones as we remove them for their last journey to their eternal reward. Now, the story of the soldiers who fought the Great War and the nurses that participated, you know, the bugle call is easy, it's identifiable. We can all see in their enlistment papers when they went, but many of them, and almost 40% of them, have no known grave. So the bell never tolled for most of the men and women who were lost to the Great War. And that's a travesty, but it's not just a travesty at all for the soldier or the individual or the nurse. It's more a travesty and an absolute, a massive loss to the loved ones left at home, because the consciousness in the Irish we identify with farewell, we identify with a graveyard, we identify very much with saying goodbye and having the healing process of the loss of a loved one starts with us all saying a collective goodbye in a church and a graveyard, and the tolling bell is a very emotive part of that. So in November 1924, you know, even to look, and historically we think that our Great War memory stops very quickly in 1919, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. But in 1924 here, there's the unveiling and the blessing of the 16th Division Cross that went over to the Somme that would remain there. So this is a Celtic cross, and you can see that there's over 50,000 people at this blessing or unveiling before it went off on its journey to Flanders, over to the Somme. So we can see, right, that this is we have not disconnected from our Great War memory per se just yet. And if you go to France and Flanders or the Somme or Gallipoli, or to the many battles that you have seen or that we have been part of the Great War, you will see symbols that are easily identifiable as being very Irish. Here on the left, you're looking at is the Munster Fusilier Cross in Ypres. The middle one is the 16th Division Cross, the one that was unveiled, and that's in Mézines. And on the right, you see a Celtic cross outside a church in Ginchy. Now, Guillemont and Ginchy, as part of the Battle of the Somme, was a very, very important part of the 16th Irish Division's history and heritage. So just to set the scene a little bit, I'd like to just go through, history is not the same as memory, first of all. History is the written word. Memory can change. We can now, with the passage of time, look at recovering our World War I experiences by changing the focus, like putting on glasses for the first time. And now at last, we can engage with compassion our long forgotten women and men of World War I. But more importantly, empathize and feel for the loved ones that were left at home to deal with this massive loss without assistance. So history and memory, here's two emotive symbols. The 16th Irish Division's Shamrock and the 36th Ulster Division's Red Hand of Ulster, which are symbols of both divisions. While we definitely share a common history, however, our memories are very contested. It is very relevant that the new Ireland of post-1919 considered Great War service as disloyal at best and the work of traitors at worst. Throughout the forming years of our Irish identity as a new state, we had to forget the sacrifice as it didn't conform to our new narrative of an independent Irish homeland. A recurring theme that I have caught most nights that when I've zoomed in here to this excellent, informative and authoritative lecture series is often projects where people have become personally involved in heightening remembrance of people or items, either through the writing of books or the collection of memorabilia. It all adds to a collective memory, or as I like to refer to it as remembrance, because we didn't remember the Great Wall sacrifice just after it happened. So it took us to re-engage with it, to re-remember it. And as Connor said the other night, and I'll paraphrase him in a way that I've used in the past, you pass away twice. First, when you die, and secondly, when the last person that remembers you dies. Memory, which is best achieved by memorials, and the memorial effect of these, the memory effect of these memorials is to trigger a memory that will recall a loved one or an event in the past. And I will speak about memorials a little bit later on, as opposed to monuments, which are a much different trigger altogether. So history versus heritage, right? So your history is your history. Your heritage can be defined as those parts of your history that you want to pass on to future generations. So like if you look on the right here, you'll see the Ulster Tower, emotively connected with the first day of the Somme 1916, 1st of July. The massive loss of life from the 36th Ulster Division became part of their culture, part of their heritage, and it is with them to this day. On the other hand, the sacrifice of all the other Irishmen from, we'll say, the 26 counties who didn't bring that heritage from the Great War really resurfaced to me around the point in time where former President Mary McAleese and Queen Elizabeth unveiled the Island of Ireland Peace Park in 1998. We then found a door opening where we could re-engage with our history through our heritage of the Great War and that loss. So just to bring it back a tiny bit, like you'll have to understand what a little bit about how it happened. So on the 28th of June, 1914, Gravillo Princip shot dead Archduke Ferdinand and his wife Sophie in Sarajevo. He was going to inherit the kingdom or the Austria-Hungarian Empire from his uncle Franz Ferdinand. Gravillo didn't start the Great War. You know, sometimes you say the shots that were fired in Sarajevo started the Great War. It really didn't. It occasioned it. It facilitated it. It had consequences that led to a Great War. You know, and the 28th of June is an emotive day for nationalism in Serbia because it's the anniversary of the Battle of the Field of Blackbirds. And that from centuries and centuries ago was really, you know, and we would most recently have seen it at the start of the 20th century when it was used as a platform by Serb nationalists, again, in the form of I'll come back to his name. He'll come back to me in a minute. His name, Slobodan Milosevic, and so on and so forth, where they used it to re-engage with their Serbian identity. But really, the causes of the Great War were militarism, alliances, imperialism, nationalism. And the glue that kept the Europe from fighting at the end of the 19th century was really Otto von Bismarck, because he had so many alliances designed to protect Germany that wars just couldn't happen. But the thing is, the guys that could have stopped the Great War were all here in front of us now. And you can see militarism in great detail here. These are the Kaiser, the King, and the Tsar. All cousins, all related, mostly through Queen Victoria and then through the Danish royal family as well. All well able to communicate with each other freely. But these guys turned a serious diplomatic situation into a great war. And what eventually caused the Great War to start wasn't German saber rattling okay, Austria-Hungary had issued an ultimatum to Serbia, and they had asked Russia for help. But before everything got out of hand, Russia started to mobilize its army. And there is a saying that I've picked up from the American War, Civil War, by a fellow called Nathan Bradford Forrest, and he says the only way to win a battle is get there the firstest with the mostest. You get to the point of the battle quickly with the most troops and the most ammunition, and you will win the battle. That's how the empires thought at the start of the 20th century. So Russia mobilized before there was any declaration of war. Germany's only way of attacking Russia was to attack France first, because the Schieffelin plan wouldn't allow for any other method of attack. That's the way the German defense was designed. Once Russia mobilized, and a world war was inevitable. So the Bugle called. Did the local Kilkenny guys know that what was going on, or anybody in Ireland or in the UK really, in the military? No, they didn't. They hadn't a clue about this whole diplomatic, the failing diplomatic world that was happening around them. So when war was declared, the guys were mobilized, and most of them were just, doing their job, being mobilized. The Royal Irish Regiment, the local regiment, were actively moved by the 1st of August. They were actually in Le Havre by the 13th of August in 1914. That was a quick move from being sitting in barracks around Ireland to being actually on mainland Europe. So I suppose the total figures for County Kilkenny, there was 3,300 men and women enlisted at least, and this information comes mostly from a database that I've been given access to by the Kilkenny Great War Committee when they were putting together their massive database in order to determine the names for the memorials on the riverbank and the one in McDonough train station. And of those 3,300 men and women, 830 died throughout the Great War. So that's not an insignificant figure. 830 people is a lot of people, mostly men, but there were 5 nurses involved, and a number of priests were included in the men's figures. So in order to bring this and to understand, it's best I've broken it down by parish. Now, I'm not going to go into any parishes in detail. I've selected a small number of parish that we will delve into. But first of all, Kilkenny is a great place. Parish is the nucleus of everything. The beating heart of any parish probably is the GA club, and you will identify with the colours of your club. But even going back in the day, and the borders of parishes are very defined. So it allows you to do an analysis based on geographical location within the county, and the best boundaries to use are your parishes. So just to say, Redmond's call, we identify with our participation in the Great War with a call to war by John Redmond, advocating support of the Home Rule Act. In order to get that act through, he felt that if they participated in the war, it would strengthen his cause. That may be true in part, but 45,000 Irishmen were already fighting when John Redmond made that speech in Wooden Bridge in County Wicklow. The other guy on the left there, I like this because his name is Kitchener, and he calls himself, how he identified himself was a Kerry-born Englishman. You cannot be an Englishman if you're born in County Kerry. He was a Kerry Irishman, a Kerry-born Irishman who identified as an Englishman. Okay, it was his being put in charge of the war, the war per se, and that a lot of people did answer his call, but the guys that answered Redmond's call and joined Kitchener's armies did not fight till the very end of 1915, and mostly not till 1916, because they had to be trained, they had to be loaded, and they had to be shipped over in more uniformed armies, right? Redmond's call identified with 1916, but the soldiers who were fighting in Flanders in 1914 and most of 1915 were already in the army and were professional soldiers or professional reservists. So the total numbers are 42 to 45,000, and mostly professional and reservists. Why did they join? Their own personal reasons. We cannot put our heads, our minds into the minds of a guy 110 years ago and figure out why he joined. Some of the reasons they may have joined would be for education purposes, might be for the pay, and then how did they end up in Redmond, certain regiments? How can you identify geographical locations with recruitment areas? So the Royal Irish Regiment, the 18th Regiment of Foot, is the oldest infantry regiment in the then old British Army. It existed from 1640s up until 1922, when it was disbanded with the rest of the Southern Irish regiments as part of the treaty negotiations conducted by Michael Collins and co. So the local regiment in Kilkenny would have been the Royal Irish Regiment, headquarters in Clonmel, County Tipperary, and the recruitment area was Kilkenny, Tipperary, Wexford and Waterford. They're the guys, it's the general area that most of the guys were from at the start of the war. So the deaths of Kilkenny men and women by year is like this. So you look at the graph, God knows we're fed up looking at graphs on the telly and there's no good news, but this is how to quantify the deaths by year. So you can see 71 people, Kilkenny people died in 1914. The highest year was 1916 when 210 were killed. And then actually 1915 and 1917 are 186 and 185, practically the same. 1918 is 140, and post 1919 is 43. Guys who died of their wounds and died of disease caused by war service, it was still counted up until around 1921 that they died of the Great War. So deaths by parishes in the counties then. So this is just, I'm sorry, it's a bit difficult to read, but you can see, as you would expect, the main numbers, the biggest parish that contributed to the soldiers that died in the Great War is John's Parish in Kilkenny City. And you can see there Patrick's, St. Canice's, and St. Patrick's are there as well, and St. Mary's. And then the urban, rural towns then are very high, Castlecomer, Callan and Thomastown. So that's just to show you, give you a perspective on, and there are soldiers that died in every parish in Kilkenny. So the first soldier that died is Private James Ryan, and he died on the 20th of August 1914. Private Ryan was from St. Mary's Parish in Kilkenny, and Private Ryan was struck by a train while he was guarding Cove railway station before deployment. He didn't even get to Flanders. The train arrived into the station with the lights out, and Private Ryan was somewhere on the train track, and his skull was crushed. He died before he went. The first guys that died in action were Private John Connolly and Private William Walsh, and they died in the first day of the Battle of Mons. And then Private Walsh is from Clara, and Private Connolly is from Ferrybank, which was in Kilkenny. The last soldier to die with a Kilkenny address during the actual war is Lance Corporal James Darcy, and he dies on the 10th of November 1918, and he's from St. Canice's Parish. And the picture you see there is the Angel of Mons, and this was a religious symbology that was used by the British in great success to show that God was on their side. The Angel of Mons shined down and helped our soldiers halt the German attack. The Schifflin plan stopped it in its tracks for a little while, just in the area of Mons, or slowed it down to allow or facilitate an orderly withdrawal back down towards the Marne. The Kilkenny's youngest soldier to die was actually a second private in the Royal Air Corps, or recently had been changed to the Royal Air Corps from the Royal Flying Corps. His name is Second Private Thomas Woodgate. Thomas is 14 years of age when he drowns on the 10th of October 1918 on the mail ship Leinster, as it was bringing post from Dublin over to the UK. 569 people were lost when the ship was sunk by a German torpedo, and 22 postal workers were also lost. They were sorting mail down in the belly of the ship as the torpedo hit. 35 soldiers in total from County Kilkenny were younger than 18 years of age, 18 or younger when they died. And I suppose just to quickly mention here, you know, at this stage, the Kilkenny's oldest soldier to die was Chaplain Lawrence O'D, and he was a chaplain. He was from St. Mary's Parish, and he dies of natural causes, actually, on the 4th of the 11th, 1917. But the importance of a priest to a soldier who was facing life-threatening circumstances every second of his existence in a foreign land can't be overestimated. They were really important. 15 Kilkenny chaplains are listed as having participated in the Great War. So this is a quick story. Le Pile, the 20th of October 1914. This is Sergeant William Barry. He's born in Kilkenny City in 1881. He enlisted in the Royal Irish Regiment in 1899. He's a Boer War veteran. He marries Margaret Kervick in 1902. They live in Goose Hill. In the 1911 census, they have 6 children. When he's called up in August 1914, they have 9 children. His youngest son is called Martin. Martin was born when Sergeant William Barry was away on summer camp. William, in all likelihood, never even saw his son, Martin. In the 19th of October 1914, Sergeant Barry and his battalion are brought into action in a little place called Le Pile in northern France. They take the village, they hold it overnight, but a massive German counterattack on the 20th devastates the battalion. Sergeant William Barry is killed. He has no known grave. He is recorded on a memorial in La Torre. Sergeant William Barry's wife didn't find out that he was actually dead until at least the middle of 1915, and probably just early in 1916. So she had to deal with 9 young children under 15 years of age, not knowing whether her husband was alive or dead. And even in her middle age, if she had the money to go to Flanders to visit her husband's grave once, she would have been very disappointed because he had no grave. Sergeant Barry is somewhere in the soil in around a village called Herlays where Le Pile was. And that's typical of the experience of Kilkenny, women, wives, mothers, daughters, children. It was the savage loss of a loved one without knowing the circumstances and probably never knowing the full circumstances. This is Kilkenny's greatest awarded, decorated soldier of the Great War. He's born in Kilkenny Barracks, probably, on the 21st of February, 1885. At the beginning of the First World War, his father was a band conductor in the Kilkenny militia, and he was paid by the Earl of the Butlers, whoever was owned the castle, because the colonel of the militia was generally the owner of the castle. His family, and when his father's contract had ended as the band conductor, they moved to Scotland. A young Frederick William Hall joins the Scottish Rifles, and he leaves them after 10 years service, and he emigrates to Canada. He joins the 8th Battalion of the Canadian Expeditionary Force, and he's in a trench on the 24th of April 1915. His battalion is gassed. Sergeant Hall attempts to recover the wounded, 2 of his wounded soldiers from a trench system. He fails on the first attempt, and on the second attempt, he's gathering one of the soldiers when he is fatally struck by a German sniper rifle. Company Sergeant Major Frederick William Hall has no known grave. He's recorded on the Menon Gate Memorial in Ypres. So for my parish analysis, I've selected 6 parishes centering south of Kilkenny City. They are Danesfort, Ballyhale, Thomastown, Dunnamaggin, Tullahearn and Callan. So I'd say there's many a battle been on a GA field between all parishes, and let's hope it starts again this summer. But this is a different type of an analysis. So just for information, this slide outlines to you the participation. Between the 6 parishes, they supply 584 soldiers and nurses to the Great War effort. Of the 584, 127 of them actually lose their lives in total. 12 from Danesfort, 59 from Callan, 10 from Dunnamaggin, 35 from Thomastown, 4 from Tullahearn and 7 from Ballycallan. But this is interesting. When we look at the selected parishes by year, you'll see that for some reason, and I'll explain in a second, that 1915 is the year that all parishes combined have the highest casualty rate. Well, that indicates to me that the soldiers, the majority of the soldiers that enlisted and fought with the parishes in the different regiments, and we'll go through them in a minute, were already pre-war soldiers. They had already enlisted. The Redmond call effect, you know, did supply soldiers, but already lots of the soldiers from these parishes were in the war. Now, it's a little bit more complex than that. Of the total figure, as you would expect, almost 200 of them were in the Royal Irish Regiment. But funny enough, 50 of them were either in the Australian forces, the American forces, the Canadian Expeditionary Force, the New Zealand forces, or South Africa. I've been able to identify at least 24 of them as being British, but there were at least over 100 more of them already that enlisted in British regiments that would indicate to me that they had already. So there was a big immigration effect in that region of South Kilkenny as well. So I'm not going to give you a list of all the soldiers that were killed, but I will just list a few surnames, and I presume, because I'm not really from the location, but they might be identifiable even today. So in Tullaharn, Walsh; in Thomastown, Bryan; in Danesfort, Wickhams, McCarthy's, McDonald's, Burke's, Bulgers, Brennan's, Cairns, Darcy; in Dunnamaggin, Bergen's, Dempsey's, Malay, Ryan, Cook, Mourne, Moroni, Marnell, Collins. So the worst days for the 6 parishes combined were these 4 dates here. On the 19th of October, the same day as William Barry was killed or went missing forever, there were also 4 guys from these parishes here. And that's not unusual because, as I already mentioned to you, the guys from the regiment went at the very start, so they were in the first battles. The 24th of April 1915 is a day when 4 soldiers from the regiments are killed. Thomas Ward from Callan, Michael Clancy, Patrick Morley, and from Callan. They're 3. The 4 guys that die in the 19th of October are Doyle Patrick, Edward Riley, William Keogh, and Thomas O'Neill. You know, like, these are all local names, and they died. And then the very worst period was a 6-day period between the 3rd and the 9th of October, the battles of Guillemont and Ginchy, and 6 guys from the parishes die during that time there. And we can go through the names at a later stage if anybody wants to know. So I'm going to go into some personal stories. And this is an old picture of Kells. I just added a bit of colour to it. And this to symbolize it, if you're up to your waist in water in a trench, you're not thinking about the here and now. If you're a young soldier called Sullivan, and I'll talk about him in a minute, and you're buried in a trench and you just have a cup of tea, you've nothing to keep you warm, it's miserable. In the here and now, you're not thinking about where you are. You're thinking about the best memory you possibly can. And if you were from Kells back 100 and odd years ago in a trench, well, your mind is wandering back to the nice summer strolls you had, saving the hay in Kells and so on and so forth. And that's the typical nature. That's how Irish guys work. You know, you bring back the memories. It's not like they could turn on their phone and look at photographs. It was all mental memory. So here's one story. So Nurse Stacia Welch. Stacia Welch is born in Thomastown in 1886. She's the daughter of Joseph and Alice Welch. In 1908, she emigrates to America. She becomes a Red Cross nurse. She enlists in the American Expeditionary Force in March 1918, and she's with them in Flanders until the end of 1919. She does such a good job, she and one other nurse are awarded a prize of a year's travel in Europe, with which she goes to Italy and returns home to Thomastown. After finishing in Thomastown, she goes back to Oregon. She's just back there in time to coordinate the Red Cross fight against the Spanish flu pandemic that has hit America big time in 1920. In 1925, she marries Gabriel Dunn. They have one son, Richard, born in 1926. Stacia visits Thomastown at least 3 times that I can find: 1919, 1937, and 1952. She dies on the 15th of May, 1971, and she's buried in Calvary Cemetery, Washington. Stacia was so proud of her military service, she must have stipulated in her will that she be recorded on her memorial stone as being an army nurse of World War I. That's audacious. Now there's a young lady who left Thomastown in 1908 and became a hero necessarily because she was awarded a gold medal, either a service medal or a special service medal by the President of the United States in Oregon sometime around 1920. This is all the nurses, just to list them all, and they're not all from our area. Well, I'd just like to mention Nurse Mildred Feeney, Elizabeth Ormond, Florence Elizabeth Butler, Violet Margaret O'Neill Power. It's just, we don't often think of the nurses when we think of Great War service. But they're as important. So you also have Angela Michelle Murray here from Graignamanagh. So these are all very significant people, and their story is underrepresented as being participants in the Great War. So this here is Private Sullivan. He dies of wounds on the 27th of June 1915. He lists in his next of kin slot Ellen Sullivan from Rath, Culbin, Kells, County Kilkenny. His mother gets a dependence pension from the loss of Private Sullivan until 1928. Private Sullivan is buried in the same cemetery in Ballyule, as you can see in the bottom of the picture. And funnily enough, he's buried in the same cemetery as James Murphy of Thomastown, Jeremiah Walsh of Callan, and Edward Moran of Dunnamaggin. Maybe they knew each other in life, but they're in their eternal reward, buried in the same cemetery. And as you can see, it's very well looked after. This is a very sad story. This is Private Patrick Hogan of the Machine Gun Corps. Patrick Hogan enlists in the Curragh in 1916. He's 23 years of age, and you can see here on the front page, it says fit for service in the field, at home and abroad. Good physical condition. By the following year, Private Hogan is being court-martialed in the field for desertion of his post, and he's sentenced to death by firing squad. You can see it written down there on in the fourth line. It is eventually commuted from death by firing squad to 5 years in prison, and that was eventually because of his he was disabled by shell shock. He was unable to fasten his shoelaces, he was unable to count money, and he was unable to live a normal life. But the British Army just discharged him, and his last address was Black in Knocktofer, County Kilkenny. Now, I can't find a death record for Private Patrick Hogan, but God knows he had such a torrid time in his Great War experience that let's hope that he got some of his faculties back and he was able to live a normal life. Some of the awards awarded to people from the 6 parishes. We have Distinguished Conduct Medals. Private Sergeant Thomas McClure from the Royal Garrison Artillery was a Distinguished Conduct Medal and a Military Medal recipient. He was awarded that medal for superior bravery under fire when his Royal Garrison Artillery guns, these are big guns, came under counter-battery fire from the Germans, and he held his gun position and kept the guns in action. For these, he was awarded the Distinguished Conduct Medal. The next story is Fireman Henry Barnes. He's from Thomastown. He's on SS Irvana, which is sunk by a German torpedo on the 1st day of January 1917. Obviously, Henry has no known grave. He's lost at sea somewhere south of the Greek islands. Funnily enough, the captain of the ship was Captain Turner, who had been the captain of the Lusitania. So Captain Turner wasn't a very lucky captain. 2,400 people were on the ship. Less than 150 died. Unluckily for Henry, he was a fireman, which meant he was down in stoking the fires and keeping the steam going. So he had no hope of survival, really. I'm sure his wife, Miss Barnes, she never got to Tower Memorial in London, and I doubt if it was even built. by the time, if she was able to go. So the war was tough, you know, guys ran forward into action. If you were take a casualty during the battle, nobody had time to stop to collect you. You were left there. If that was a contested battlefield, your body disintegrated into the ground. You know, if you were lucky, if your colleagues found you after the battle, where they would reclaim your body and bring you and give you a decent Christian burial, maybe a somewhat hurried burial. And the unlucky guys, unfortunately, just disappeared into the Flanders soil or the Somme soil. Only the wealthiest women ever really, who had the time or who had the capability to go visit a Commonwealth war graveyard in their lifetimes. The majority of the Kilkenny women, take Mrs. Barry, who was raising 9 young children, had no hope. She never even had a photograph of her husband's grave because he didn't have a grave. The memorial that was built to honor him in Le Touré wasn't probably built by the time she was an old woman. Today, if you're lucky, you can go and you can visit the Menine Gate, where 58,000 men and women who disappeared into the Flanders soil are remembered every night with a last post service. The wounded, God love them, had a horrific experience, but at least they got home. And I did see Liam posted earlier on some of the first, a local man from Kells who was one of the first guys who underwent plastic surgery after World War I. Now that wasn't, it was successful, it would be successful, but it took them a long time to perfect it. You know, some of the lucky guys in Le Pillet spent the entire war in this German POW camp called Lindbergh. You know, and they were kind of very lucky in that a Catholic priest was sent over from Kilkenny City called Father Crotty. Here he is, and he spent a lot of time looking after their spiritual welfare. Funnily enough, it's the same POW camp that Roger Casement went to try and create the Irish Brigade in the German army. But 135,000 British ex-servicemen were living in what is now the Republic of Ireland in 1921. Of these, at least 37,500 had a serious disability of one sort or another. They were mostly targeted for being loyalists rather than ex-British servicemen. Other First World War veterans went straight into the Irish Volunteers or the IRA after returning from the front, taking up arms against the army that they had fought for. And many of those guys who fought through both the Great War and the War of Independence then put on a uniform of one kind or another to continue that in the Civil War. So some guys, and there are Kilkenny guys who you can identify and see that had fought through the Great War, were in the War of Independence and came through the Civil War as well. But, you know, everything changed. All changed. 1918 happened. The war ended, and the Sinn Féin had a landslide election win in the end of 1918. And here you can see Cosgrave and De Valera together up at the Kilkenny court, the courthouse, the old courthouse. And so the whole mindset was changing. The Sinn Féin agenda of they won the election and they had a landslide victory. And then out of that started the War of Independence and everything changed. This is a picture from 1918, 1919 in the area of Graignamanagh with the Irish Volunteers. Now, obviously, this was before the War of Independence started. But the guys who came back had to meekly go about their business because, as I've already mentioned, they were considered very differently. You know, this is the 7th of February 1922 when the barracks here, which I'm sitting in right now, was taken over by the Irish Volunteers, or the IRA actually, under the command of Brigadier General George Dwyer, who was the brigade commander of the Kilkenny Brigade after the arrest of Tom Tracy and subsequently after him, Peter DeLucre. You know, but you have to say, we were very good, and now we remember to forget, right? And forgetting the missing 40,000 and the equally accomplished trick of, you know, the vanishing trick of the two, forgetting the many survived and came home. Official Ireland had no problem not knowing about this uncomfortable part of our history. Southern Protestants meekly went along with this new reality, reserving their memories for Remembrance Sunday and a poppy discreetly worn under an overcoat. Here we see Kevin O'Higgins, and funnily enough, alongside him, that's his brother, Michael Alphonsus O'Higgins, who died as a lieutenant in the Leinster Regiment in 1917. No one denies this, and this is Kevin O'Higgins talking in the Dáil. No one denies the sacrifice, and no one denies the patriotic motives which induced the vast majority of men to join the British Army and to take part in the Great War. And yet, it is not their sacrifice that this state is based, and I have no desire to see it suggested that it is. This is O'Higgins talking in Dáil about a proposed memorial to be erected in Dublin City. However, post-independence Ireland was not solely composed of Kevin O'Higgins. Several county councils, including Wexford, Cork, Tipperary, voted not to employ ex-servicemen, and also, in a particularly noble gesture, they withheld educational scholarships for their children. And this is just a little extract from a book written by Kevin Myers, which I enjoyed reading. So what were the rewards for the returned veterans? Well, there are in excess of 70 veterans' houses built in Kilkenny, the biggest scheme, single scheme being in Shockfoshdeen, close to Callan. Mary Ann, who introduced me here tonight, is somewhat of an expert on the whole houses for heroes, as they became known. And funnily enough, really, they were the first houses built in our new Irish state as social housing, I suppose, for want of a better word. Other rewards might look like service medals or the death medallion. The medallion on the left is, roughly the size of a side plate in your house, and it records only the name of every soldier that died in the British Commonwealth during the Great War. It is known colloquially as the dead man's penny, and your rank and name wasn't included because, as far as the king was concerned, in death, everybody was equal. And I should mention just at this point now, I've just gone through most of the presentation, but you cannot identify people from Ireland who fought in the French army. I've tried. You can't identify people who fought in the Russian army. The records don't exist. The German army, there's no suggestion anywhere, or I can find, that Kilkenny citizens enlisted and joined in the Great War on this German side. I'm sure they probably did. It's just very difficult to find any examples of where they are. And I'm sure if they were found, they would happily be added to the memorials that are dotted around the country now. I started by talking about memorials, and there's just to make an analogy between a memorial and a monument. Monuments are a very important part of our Irish psyche as well. A monument is a structure which is explicitly created to commemorate a person or an important event. I particularly like the one of Tomás McDonagh on the right here. I just wish his cap was on his head, not on the ground, but that's okay. It's in Cloughjordan, County Tipperary, and it absolutely exemplifies Tomás McDonagh and his connection with the Irish Proclamation of Independence. A very, very emotive piece of script for me. The middle one in Grafton Street is a monument to Phil Lynott. What's that got to do with this? But it has a monumental effect. When you walk past that monument, you almost hear the boys are back in town. It does its job. Now, you can connect with the picture on the left, which is the monument to the Kilkenny hurlers. I, being a Wexford man, I look the other way when I'm passing it mostly, but it does a great job. It identifies with the massively important connection that there is with Kilkenny and successful in hurling. On the other hand, a memorial. I love this memorial, and I consider this to be a memorial. Now that I've put this slide up, everybody looking at this presentation has immediately thought in their mind, famine, emigration. It does its job, and its job is remembrance. Other forms of remembrance. This is a caribou calling its children home, its dead Newfoundland soldiers home from the battlefield called Beaumont Hamel on the Somme battlefield. Here's Ballingarry and Callan. These are memorials identifying with the people, men and women, who were lost to the Great War. They are all about remembrance and giving these people, 40% of whom anyway have no known graves, And now they're just giving, like the Caribous calling the Newfoundland troops home to Newfoundland. These memorials, the effect is they're giving all the people who are remembered on the memorials an anchor point in Kilkenny's heritage and history right now. There is nothing, there is no empire here. This is a memorial to Kilkenny men and women and Tipperary men and women in the Ballingarry Memorial. And I think it's a superb way. And it has to be large. We've tried the small ones. If you cannot identify with 830 lost souls with a 1 cubic meter of granite, it just doesn't work. Do you know? And this allows the wives, the mothers, the sweetheart. It's not just the names. The descendants now are going down looking for their loved ones' names, or they never knew them, but they're looking at them through their parents' eyes. The recall, it's calling them home. Do you know? But the people, the guys that started it all, the Kaiser, Wilhelm, he died of old age in Holland in 1941, and King George died in old age 1936 in the UK. You know, these guys could have stopped it all, but didn't, because of nationalism, and agreed. I didn't mention it earlier on, but there's one thing I want to say, right? When the only reason you need a big navy is to protect a big merchant navy, and that's about trade. When goods stop crossing borders, armies start crossing borders, and that's what this was all about. On the other hand, Savilo Princip is commemorated by a monument in Serbia now. He's a national hero, even though he died in jail sometime after the war. So I'll finish up now. My 40 minutes are just up. And this is Tom Kettle. And Tom Kettle had a great, you know, attitude. And he went to the war and he died in the Somme, and he died in Guillemont or Ginchy, actually. But he wrote a poem, several poems, fantastic poet, Irish politician. But he saw the Great War as being a way of preventing Belgium becoming to Germany like Ireland was to Great Britain, subjugated. You know, he wanted to free all that. So if you don't mind, I'll just finish up with this. So here, like the mad guns curse overhead, and tired men sigh with mud for crouch and floor, know that we fools, now the foolish dead, died not for flag, nor king, nor emperor, but for a dream born in a herdsman's shed, and the secret scripture of the poor. Thank you very much. I'd just like to say before I end that if anybody has a query or a question, or would like me to do some research on a Great War soldier or soldiers involved in the Irish War of Independence from Kilkenny, that's my email address. And please just forward me any questions, no problem. So on that note, Liam and Marianne, that's me finished. Thank you very much.
Thanks, million, Larry. That was fascinating, to be honest. Couple of questions coming in. So, I suppose one for myself here first, but did the Irishmen who fought in World War I help to build our national identity in the same way that those involved in the 1916 Rising or the War of Independence or Civil War did, do you think?
Okay, right. For me, Marianne, thanks for the tough question to start me off. For me, we cannot have blinkers on. You cannot decide. The guys who went off in 1914, they went for, because they were in the army, it was their job, they had no choice, right? And many of them would have agreed with Redmond's desire for home rule, you know? But you can't separate them entirely from the 1916 insurrection. Lots of, you know, many of them would participate. One Kilkenny man, Corporal John Brennan, dies in the Royal Irish Regiment on an attack on the South Dublin Union. He's an unremembered Kilkenny citizen who dies during the 1916 rebellion, but he's in a British uniform. But in essence, for me, we are molded now today by our collective history and heritage. You cannot say, no, that's not part of, or didn't form part of the foundation of the Irish state, or we are not, you know, our collective memory now forms our opinions, and you cannot, they're part of it. Okay, the guys who fought in the War of Independence you know, we're at this pointy end of the sword in relation to, you know, the activities from 1919 to 1922, and then the Civil War has its own connotations, and it is an important part of our decade of centenaries, and should not be disconnected, in my opinion, from everything that's gone before it. It's all part of the same. So for me, yes, I build my Irishness is built out of all those guys and all those ladies and their loss and where they have brought us today. We're here today thanks in general to their sacrifice, if that answers the question. Perfect.
Liam O'Sullivan has a question. He'd just like to get your opinion on how these men in all of our conflicts, both national and international, may have had PTSD and
absolutely
undiagnosed, and how were they integrated back into society?
Well, actually, they weren't integrated back to society. They were left. There is a record of 25 men coming back into Kilkenny in 1918 off a train, and they're brought straight to the mental institution, as it was called at the time, the mental asylum up in St. Canice's, and they all stayed there until they died. One of them was actually in the 1950s, and his mother used to come in from Johnstown to visit him, and sometimes he might get out from under the bed to talk to her. Yeah. We didn't have the capability, and there was no desire. The New Ireland didn't feel obliged to look after these guys. They had their British pensions, they had whatever they had, and in essence, we didn't have the medical capability to deal with them. Lots of them died alcoholics, I'll be honest with you.
Connor has a question. What are your 2 or 3 go-to resources for researching these stories?
Okay, so now, right nowadays, and there's a conversation we had earlier, digital archives are brilliant. I personally like Ancestry, and in there, I know it's paid, you have to pay for it, but it's well worth the fee. And inside in that, there's another one called Fold Tree, and Fold Tree is a treasure trove of recently digitized military records. Now, you won't get a soldier's record unless you're lucky. The majority of the soldier records were burnt in the Blitz in 1940 in London, but it's called the burnt records. You can get lucky and you can find a fully intact record. But the medal index cards, the pension records, and the wills, which are available to view free on from an Irish database there as well. The books, mostly. All the books I use are old books, and I have this in my head that if you want to get a new idea, read an old book. So the books are from the 40s, 50s, 60s, because that's when the first generation of research was coming out, you know. But if you want to email me later on, I'll gladly send an email list of books that I find very useful.
Niamh has a good question here. She said, after the war ended, could the soldiers get discharged straight away, or did they have to serve out a specific amount of time?
Most of the soldiers joined for the duration of the war. You'll see that on the records. Some of them were professional soldiers. Many of the soldiers stayed in, the professional soldiers stayed in the Royal Irish Regiment, for instance, because that became a part of the Army of Occupation over in Silesia post-World War I. But guys, like on the 11th of November when the war ended, it took months to get guys home. But most of them were demobilized as Class Z, or just demobilized on arrival back in their depot, wherever their home depot was in Ireland. And then they would have been given their whatever money was owed to them, and they would have drawn pensions if they were entitled to them into the future. But yeah, most of them, if they wanted out, and particularly the guys who just signed contracts just for the duration of the war, were immediately demobilized on return to Ireland. But that would have been 1919 sometime.
Okay, we'll go one more, I think. Johnny has a question here. Did any Kilkenny residents die in the small conflicts that rumbled on after World War I, such as Russia and Turkey?
Yeah. In Russia they did, and in fact there's quite a few, but they're recorded separately, and their information is not that easy to find. There is one instance, I think, where about 10 soldiers of the Royal Irish Regiment are involved in an incident, and they all lose their lives in it. It just won't come to my head right now. I'm not so sure about Turkey, to be honest with you, but definitely in the Russian part of the world, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. There's lots of complimentary comments here, saying it's a fantastic presentation, very enlightening lecture, so well done. So I think we'll just get Liam to unmute everyone and give you a round of applause. And thanks a million for your hard work. That was
Thank you very much.
presentation. So thank you.
Thank you.
Well done, Larry.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks a million, everybody. It's a pleasure.
Well done, Larry.
Well done, Larry.
Yeah, you could put them up on WhatsApp or something like that, rather than, and so that way I'll have it on the phone as well. You see, so.
Well, Larry from Belfast.
Thanks, Larry. Well,
Thank you.
Richard.
The yellow bellies.
Okay, thank you.
Well, you have WhatsApp, don't you?
You can hear me or not?
Yeah, don't worry about that.
Wasn't good.
Excellent, my God.
That's brilliant. I can
Thank you very much.
help you on some things.
No, not much. No.
It's all about Kilkenny one day.
Thanks, Des. Thanks.